Okay. I think we're ready to start. Thanks for that introduction, Hirsch. So, hello everyone, and welcome to this joint event hosted by the ESG Group and the India Regional Group. My name is Anita Panwani. I chair the ESG Group, and Hirsch Shah chairs the India Regional Group, and he will welcome you himself shortly. If you are attending an IRM event for the first time, we're a professional membership body with over 7,000 members worldwide. We provide risk education, training, and thought leadership. If you're interested, please find your way to our website for contact details of the various IRM teams. So the topic for today is a very popular topic, ESG reporting. It's a key pillar of good governance. We have a stellar panel of speakers, I'm sure you'll agree. Abdul Mohib will be speaking on how enterprise risk management can influence ESG. Abdul is Assistant Director of Risk Assurance and Projects at Peabody Group. Alex Heinzen is Chief Risk and Sustainability Officer at the Argo Group, and he'll be speaking on greenwashing, managing and mitigating the risks. Shailesh Chakrabarti is Chairman of Shailesh Chakrabarti and Associates, and he will be speaking on the evolution of governance. Just a few remarks from me in terms of reporting. The UN is reporting on progress of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The commentary is that cascading and interlinked crises are putting the 2030 agenda for sustainable development in grave danger, along with humanity's own survival. In relation to Goal 1, poverty, COVID has put previous steady progress into reverse. It's pushed 93 million more people into extreme poverty. So this is the magnitude of the challenges that are in front of us. I now turn to Hirsch Shah, who is chair of the IRM India Regional Group, to address why India is leading in ESG reporting. Over to you, Hirsch.
Thank you, Anita. Very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who've joined from around the world. I'm Hirsch Shah, the chairman for the IRM India Regional Group. The rise of stakeholder capitalism, shareholder activism, and increased appetite from companies to use ESG targets and metrics, coupled with ESG-based investments, is really reshaping the financial and economic landscape. And an increasing number of organizations are committing to decarbonize their operations. As India prepares for a meeting under its G20 presidency that will be crucial to securing the interests of developing countries, officials are taking heart from the country's ability to act as a bridge at a time of divisions within the grouping of the world's largest economies. I must talk about the theme of India's G20 presidency, which is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or One Earth, One Family, One Future. And this is drawn from the ancient Sanskrit text of the Maha Upanishad. Essentially, the theme affirms the value of all life, human, animal, planet, microorganisms, and their interconnectedness on the planet Earth. It's extremely heartening to see that India will be focusing on accelerating progress in achieving the SDGs by raising the profile of development issues across the G20 working streams. This, in my view, is an exemplary move towards building a sustainable world with coordinated risk responses to the most complex issues around environmental, social, and governance. Countries that will move faster will be able to consolidate their own national capabilities and contribute towards a better world through collaboration and trust. The ESG ecosystem in India is actually in the early stages of its evolution, with the SEBI having made it mandatory for the top 1,000 listed companies to furnish sustainability reports from this financial year. India is also one of the few countries in the world to have a corporate social responsibility mandate. This makes India a major market for sustainability solutions and green finance, and makes it crucial to the evolution of the ESG ecosystem worldwide. And as ESG concerns come increasingly into focus, businesses that fail could suffer from reputational hazards in the eyes of ESG. And now, to understand all the drivers of ESG, the opportunities, the challenges through an ERM lens, let me invite Abdul Mohib, who's an Assistant Director, Risk and Assurance and Projects at Peabody. Over to you, Abdul.
Thanks. Just checking that you can hear me and see me. Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your attendance at the webinar this morning. Hope you will take some benefit from this discussion and contribute as well. So no point repeating my introduction. All I'll say is that the focus here is sustainability and how enterprise risk management can be an enabler in making progress. Before I do that, just a brief introduction into the Environmental and Social Governance Special Interest Group of the Institute of Risk Management, IRM. Hopefully you can see the members of the SIG group on this slide. Primarily, we are here as a forum for the international IRM risk community to share knowledge and experience, and also learn from everybody to ensure that we do keep a track on achievement towards sustainability. And we do involve ourselves in coordinating ESG activities like this one this morning, as well as gaining recognition of the pivotal role that we as risk professionals play in the ESG space. And one of the things that Anita has mentioned earlier on is our alignment to the UN's 17 SDGs and sustainability development goals, and that's our sort of ultimate objective to ensure that we're all contributing and climbing the same hill. So details are on the IRM page of the SIG section. So if you do need to get in touch with us, it's there. Now, moving on specifically to where I work at Peabody, which is a housing association, a social housing provider, and we are in the process of joining together with another social housing provider to become the second largest housing association in the country. And one of our strategic priorities is we want to become a sustainable organization with three goals, and they're listed on the slide that you're hopefully seeing now. Now, the goals are obviously very strategic, and that means we need milestones or to help us achieve those goals. And you can see, again, I've listed some of those milestones that would help us to reach our overall goal of Peabody becoming a sustainable organization. Now, this isn't just about jumping on to a hot topic. For example, we have an area of London known as Thames Mead that primarily owned by Peabody. We have residents living there. We still are in the process of developing homes, but River Thames flows through it. It's a low-lying field, and therefore the natural exposure to flooding is prominent. And so, as you can imagine, us considering our climate change risks is very important as part of the wider sustainability agenda. Making sure that our homes are fit for purpose, energy efficient, and again, providing our residents with electric charging units in the future to make it all, again, as I keep saying, sustainable. So in terms of practical aspects, what have we done? So Peabody has led on the development of this, what we call Sustainability Reporting Standard, SRS, for the social housing sector, which came live in November, as early as November 2020. And this standard brings consensus on how we can measure performance and report performance against ESG in pursuit of overall sustainability. There are 12 themes. Some of them are listed on my slide. And as I say, for example, the climate change theme is directly linked to the UN's SDG. Within the 12 themes, there are 48 criteria. And again, those criteria are in some shape or form linked to UN SDGs, but also the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, as well as Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB, as well as the International Capital Market Association, which is the ICMA. Specifically, so that's for the social housing sector. And on that note, I can share with you that over 120 organizations have signed up to following this SRS, this Sustainability Reporting Standard. But specifically also, we've developed Peabody's Sustainable Finance Framework, which essentially is there to help us align ourselves with our corporate strategy. So for example, building more affordable homes and improve the energy performance of our existing stock. We have signed up to being assessed by the independent organization, the Reputational Risk, as well as currently we are undergoing a materiality assessment to ensure that we can focus on our specific stakeholders. So when it comes to the risk management and enterprise risk management, ERM, acting as an enabler, as you can see, hopefully in front of you, that we have a standard governance structure. And this is also our risk governance structure within the organization, with the board right at the top of the organization, followed by audit and risk committee, other committees such as development committees, customer experience committee. We have the executive committee. We also have the risk champions forum, as well as other subsidiaries. And what you will note is the purple boxes, where at every level of the organization, we have a risk, a dialogue, and an escalation, which right at the top of the organization is a strategic risk register, whereby risks are discussed. And one of those specific risk dialogue involves sustainability. So in practice, what does this mean? So at every level of the organization, to help the risk dialogue happening for sustainability, we've developed a strategic risk dashboard, whereby you can see there's been clear articulation of the risk description around sustainability. We've to keep the options open, so we have common understanding. We've called it carbon retrofitting, sustainability, and to capture the whole breadth of the subject. We've also agreed a risk appetite position with narrative, as well as agreeing key risk indicators, which you may call as early warning indicators. So this then gives us a sort of a common understanding of the overall risk we're trying to achieve. And as part of the risk governance structure, which is also now going to be sustainability governance structure, whereby every committee, every board now has responsibility for ensuring that sustainability risks are discussed, reviewed, assessed, and monitored. And this is a starting point of this dashboard, given the overall, but also we drill down further, capturing key controls across the whole group in terms of what are the different activities going on to ensure that the risk is managed in a holistic way, with mitigations in place and action owners and due dates. So you can see that one of those is increasing biodiversity and climate adaptation, which is very important for us. when we think about our residents and customers. Furthermore, underneath the strategic risk register, we have operational risk registers, which is also badged as directorate level risk registers. And within that, what we try and do is encourage our colleagues and our risk champions to think about the strategic priorities. So for example, we have integration, we have customer experience, we have the external operating environment, we also have sustainability as a strategic objective. And so we regularly complete surveys and ask questions and say, well, you are aware that we have a strategic priority around sustainability. Does it impact on your directorate objectives? And if so, where is the risk? What are the opportunities that are directly linked to this, so that it helps you to monitor it from a risk management perspective? So this hopefully this slide you're looking at, you will see that almost every person completing this survey from within the organization is aware of those strategic priorities like sustainability, and also equally have recognized that they are impacted, or their directorate level objectives are impacted by those strategic priorities. And therefore the next logical question is, where are those threats and opportunities in relation to these strategic priorities, of which sustainability is one of them, that you can monitor and assess proactively to help you achieve the overall goal of Peabody becoming a sustainable organization. And this is the approach we're taking at this moment through the enterprise risk management. And I'll come to a pause and stop there. I think we're taking questions later on. So if, and therefore I'll hand you over to Alex, who will be talking to you about greenwashing. Thank you. Alex, you're on mute. Are you presenting your
Yeah, no,
slide?
one of the hosts was blocking me. Can we do the backup plan? Because I can't seem to get the share to work. So while Abdul does that, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name's Alex Heinsohn, Chief Risk and Sustainability Officer at Argo Group. Argo Group is a specialty insurer. So from a financial services point of view, we are exposed to a risk called greenwashing, which if we go to the next slide, I will try and explain to you. And I think actually it's a really good example of a risk appetite debate inside a company. So I've given you the Wikipedia definition. I'm not going to read all this out, but I think in essence, the world is fairly skeptical of claims by organizations, particularly, or maybe, and their products, that they are green and or sustainable, and stakeholders are wanting more and more evidence and verification. And I think it's relevant to insurers as well, who are worrying about litigation risk. So in our own risk management framework as an insurer, we think about physical risk, we think about transition, we think about litigation, and we think the litigation element is a kind of time bomb when it's waiting to go off. I think from a risk management point of view, pretending you've done something and expecting people not to find out is not risk management. It's a bad idea. But I think in terms of how much you choose to disclose, that is absolutely a risk appetite discussion, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So if we move to the next slide. In essence, we are moving into a world where more needs to be disclosed and greater verification will be expected. In the past, if you had nothing to hide, then you had nothing to say. But now the assumption is that you probably do have something to hide if you're not saying it. And so I think there's a balance to be struck between kind of how much you choose to disclose and against which standards, particularly in a world where there's still a lot of reliance on voluntary codes. So I think we will be moving to a world with more standardization. The International Sustainability Standards Board is a new organization. It's under the umbrella of the IFRS, which is the International Accounting Organization. And so this is going to be more formalized. The UK, as an example, is mandating TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure reporting. So we will see more expectation of checking and verification and more potentially external audit involvement. So if we go to the next slide, what I want to do is take a step back for a minute and just recognize that actually reporting is the last step in a process. And if you start with reporting, then you're probably going to hit quite a few problems. And I think just briefly, the way I would approach this is to start with your context. Who are your stakeholders? And, you know, we just heard from Abdul, he's very clear on who his stakeholders are. What are your threats and opportunities, which should resonate with the risk professionals? So essentially, what's the landscape you're dealing with? Then you can start to think about your strategy around sustainability. How does it fit with your business strategy? And most importantly, how does it fit with your purpose and your values? So, you know, in a way, what are you trying to achieve? What is your ambition around sustainability? Then you can put a program in place. You can set priorities and objectives. You can put accountabilities in and get buy-in. And only then can you start reporting, firstly, internally for performance purposes, and secondly, externally. So I think just put a bit of context around that. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples from Argos. The next slide is actually the materiality grid that Abdul said they're working on. In the world of sustainability, people talk materiality. In the world of risk, we talk risk appetite. It's very much the same thing, but the lens is one of stakeholder importance. So as you can see, there are two axes here. This is something that we've, from our annual ESG report, we've now got a process of revisiting this with the Sustainability Working Group and our executive. And this is really trying to define not only what do we mean by E, S, and G, but what is important to us. And I think for me, one of the most important decisions people need to make is where they're going to focus. I think Abdul mentioned 17 sustainability development goals. You can't prioritize all 17. You have to make some choices. So you have to decide what is important. And this is a way of explaining to your stakeholders where you're focusing and why, and what you're not going to do. So on the next slide, just to show, you know, how we've adopted this. So we started with 3 and we now have 4 areas that we're focusing on. As an insurer, climate is a key topic for us, as is sustainable cities. Essentially, you know, we're trying to make sure that after an event, things are rebuilt better, and that we try and kind of design resilience in some way to what we're doing. And then, you know, from a diversity and inclusion point of view, we focused on gender equality. The S in ESG was quite important to us. And then more recently, we've added decent work and economic growth. So if I keep moving, what I wanted to do is start to really focus on the greenwashing risk. So what we have been working on with our board and audit committee over the last 18 months is really to try and make them more uncomfortable with the controls that were in place around non-financial disclosures, in a way trying to prepare them for the fact that there will be very little difference in the future, potentially as a listed organization, between financial reporting and non-financial reporting. You know, there is a US focused organization. We have a lot of controls around financial reporting. Many of you may have heard of Sarbanes-Oxley. It's quite an onerous process for signing off accounts. And then when you look at the processes for signing off non-financial reporting, you see a big contrast. And I think we're trying to close that gap. And I'm not going to read all the items on here, but these are some of the things that we've been thinking about in terms of actually writing down the process that, you know, we go through to produce an annual ESG report, listing out who's accountable, what the steps are, who gives assurance, who signs off, is that discipline. and involving internal audit in challenging that. And as I've said to our board, what we're trying to do is learn how to ride the bicycle in private, because it's a US listed organization, the US Stock Exchange organization, the SEC has proposals out for mandatory reporting with external audit to kick in 2024. So we're trying to prepare the ground. Those aren't yet approved, but we're just trying to make sure we anticipate. So if we move to the next slide. Just to kind of show a little bit more as to how we've applied risk management to this. So we have basically made a list of the stakeholders that we have to think about as an insurance organization. So there is a mixture of internal stakeholders, of people in our value chain, and if you like, authorities of various kinds. If we go to the next slide, how does this actually work? Well, we start to think about reputationally, how might these organizations respond to different scenarios that we could paint? So they may be really pleased, or they may be very unhappy, but what we need to do is think about that and speak to the people in the organization closest to the stakeholders, or even reach out to those stakeholders. Briefly on the next slide, what does that look like? Well, we have a risk register, but it's a little bit more colorful than your ordinary risk register, because we're actually trying to capture the responses that we expect a stakeholder to have to different scenarios. And then we use that to map and prioritize. We have very much, as Abdul had, risk owners, we have trends. We actually map each of these to the 17 SDGs. And then we have action plans and mitigation. So all very standard stuff. The difference is we're looking at it from a stakeholder perception point of view rather than a financial impact. And lastly, what I wanted to do is show you how we've applied risk assessment and risk appetite to the actual disclosure process, bearing in mind that we're trying to avoid a greenwash event. So very much our view is we need our sustainability program to look and feel and be authentic. We're not looking to report on things that we haven't done or that we're not confident in. So we really have two measures for whether something should be in the report. Are we confident in the reliability of the data and its source? And have we thought through the consequences of making it public? And have we got everybody's buy-in internally? And I wouldn't underestimate the challenges in that second one, particularly when it comes to human resource type data, where there may be some sensitivities that get uncovered in the process. So essentially, if we have a high score on either of those metrics, then we would not disclose the information, but we would work hard to get ourselves in a position where we can do so in the future. But it's I guess the framework to put around the process to tease out of people why they don't want to report something, because there's an inherent I guess challenge in the sustainability team quite often wanting to report as much as possible, and other people being brought to the table. And this is a way we found of kind of bringing those two groups together. So just to wrap up, greenwashing is a risk. It's like any other risk. You need to decide on how you want to mitigate it and put the processes and controls in. The scrutiny is going to keep coming. You need to think about how and when and why you're reporting, and keep it simple. This is just change management. Apply all the disciplines of change management. So thank you very much.
Can we now invite Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti?
Thank you very much, Harsh. Let me begin by thanking IRM for inviting me to be here with you. And after listening to those two very erudite and very scintillating presentations on how companies actually gear up for reporting. Let me take you to a 30,000 feet view on how all of this is governed and will be governed as we move forward. So if I were to pull 2 or 3 ideas from the presentations already made, I would say we need to get our minds focused on integrated reporting, integrated thinking, and create a context using double materiality to come up with very, very important ESG actions, which can be determined and prioritized if the CEO takes charge and convenes meetings of the KMPs, the people in charge of ERM, the people in charge of internal audit, and maybe, as Alex put out in all the stakeholder definitions that they consider at Argo Group, involved with the statutory auditors. And so let's move to the first slide, where I talk about breaking the resistance to change. In fact, if I were to use the present continuous, then we need to be continually responding to the way the environment is changing dynamically. 2 months ago, it would have been anathema to ask any of the coal plants in UK to restart or get ready for restarting. But today, it's a reality which we have to face. We don't want the weather to overwhelm what we might not have considered appropriate just a few months ago. And that has arisen because the entire dynamics around availability of power have changed. That's just one stark example of what we need to do to continually respond, be dynamic about what is happening in the environment and break the resistance to change. And if you want to have that kind of evolutionary governance, then we need to look at governance not just from a fiduciary responsibility viewpoint, but from the viewpoint of accounting for the changing times that we all face. But let's look at some of the big changes that are overwhelming all of us who are in governance positions. And the reason why this overwhelming impact seems to be visible, and we can all feel it as we sit on boards and as we try and perform our functions on boards, that the stakeholder expectations are continuously evolving. And they are evolving as a response to the changes that are happening in our world. So what are the big things that stakeholders are now looking at? They are looking at deep tech. Now, we go back, please. Deep tech, which is artificial intelligence, machine learning. We just saw how the world immediately took to ChatGPT and how GPT-3 and DAL-E2 are completely transforming, particularly the young minds, in terms of how they will deal with the problems that they need to solve. If they can have augmented intelligence, they'll go get it. And it's very important that organizations remain flexible and dynamic enough to adopt these new ideas and changes. Also look at how AR, VR, and MR are completely transforming the way boards work, or the way large companies, including insurance companies and social housing companies, would have to respond. You know, if you want to do scenario analysis, or if you want to do some of the mapping of what might be the impact of the change, you need to deploy all of these technologies. And so it's the expectation of stakeholders that boards and the evolutionary governance will provide for all of this, make it happen in reality. Climate accountability, we've been talking about. We can see that we can hardly afford any more messing with the temperatures, the mean temperatures that the world can tolerate. We've already seen major climate events, the Yangtze drying up in so many places, the heat waves in France, the tidal waves that have hit various coasts, the forest fires, all of those. A very important trend seems to be that nobody wants to be a couch consumer who just accepts the products that are presented. There is a great desire on the part of the consuming public to also co-create the product. And therefore, the consumer is now transforming into a prosumer. And this has major impacts on the way organizations behave and act and work and how governance will evolve. We all know how much impact workplace neutrality, DEI, and human rights have had on all our thinking and on all the provisions we have to make to guard against being overwhelmed or being challenged, or the reputation loss arising out of not having policies which are in tune or in sync with how people actually would like it to be. And so, Harsh, moving to the next slide, like the shareholder primacy is now giving way to stakeholder capitalism. And evolutionary governance is emerging for better risk management and informed ESG decisions and actions. Some of the leading examples are Microsoft's desire to ensure that responsible and ethical artificial intelligence comes into play and not permit the very pernicious effects of runaway or rogue AI to overwhelm what happens in organizations. In fact, there's a point in time where I predict that AI will lead governance. Also take the examples of Uniqlo and Patagonia. Patagonia made bold to say that our only stakeholder will be planet Earth. And they changed their entire structure to make sure that that can become reality. I think it was a phenomenal example of what sustainability, quality, and consumer-led governance can deliver. The management there did not want the future to be prisoner to anybody but to the overall responsibility or the ultimate responsibility to the planet. And so Patagonia changed their entire ownership structure into a trust structure which would operate only for the benefit of planet Earth. Uniqlo equally committed massive resources out of their surpluses to sustainability and climate-related issues. The Tata Group in India, which is perhaps the most visible and known symbol of quality and ethical practice in India, moved to stakeholder capitalism many, many years ago. Their byline was, we also make steel in their steel company, because their prime responsibility they wanted to convey was to the whole community. Their license, the social license to exist, was of primary importance to the board of Tata. And therefore, they were able to cope with multilateral and multinational governance as the situation arose. And look at Unilever, net positive, not just net zero, is at the core of all their thinking and their governance. So that thinking is integrated, it is dynamic, it moves with the times, and at its core is becoming net positive. So let me leave, next slide please. As we reimagine fiduciary responsibilities and lead the way to evolutionary governance, we need to integrate ESG, which in India is represented in a schedule to the Companies Act. In India, perhaps it's one of the few company legislations which actually sets out very clearly what are the responsibilities and capabilities of boards, which is contained in what I refer to as Schedule 4. But look at what is going to happen. Auditing will have to encompass ESG due diligences. ESG is becoming a board responsibility. Boards are increasingly appointing ESG champions, and ESG-based board evaluation is a norm in the largest companies that I work with. I think it is going to evolve very rapidly using some of the dashboards that Alex presented and which we saw give a bird's eye view of what is likely to be the best way forward. And ESG KPIs are increasingly entering into the whole formulation of executive compensation. So as we can see, things are changing, and they're changing rapidly, dynamically. It's not as if the direction of change is singular. The direction of change may alter based on the external circumstances. And therefore, it is so important to make sure that governance remains evolutionary and always in touch and in tune with the needs of the time. That is a future that we all can look forward to. Thank you. Harsh, back to you.
Thank you very much to all the panelists for such great and wonderful insights. We've got a very good representation of stalwarts across the globe. It's now an open house, so I'll now like to invite our audiences to share their questions, and then we can request the respective panelists to respond to those. So anyone, if you have any specific questions on governance, reporting, SDGs, building a culture, greenwashing, sustainable finance. I have two questions on my private chat. Will the slides be available? Yes, we will share the slides with all of you. And will the recording be available for my teams? Yes, the recording will be available on the IRM website and the global YouTube channel for you to share it with your network. Okay, one question for Mr. Haribhakti. Any 3 tips for enhancing governance at the board level?
Okay, because you've asked me to restrict it to 3, I'll do that. Number 1, the board must create an environment of trust and ensure that people at the highest level in the organization feel that it is not just lip service to ESG that the board wants to deliver. They want action. So that lip service or the checkbox or the tick box idea has to be replaced with concrete action. Action like cleaning up rivers, cleaning up the Thames, for example. It happened because somebody in governance took that call that the river cannot be allowed to remain as dirty as it was, and they cleaned it up. So that's one. The second tip of great governance is to get feedback all the time. 360-degree feedback for every meeting, every action, every dashboard that turns up on the screens of people who are supposed to make the change happen. And 3, where there is even the hint of greenwashing, instant effective corrective action must be taken by the board in a visible manner. Accountability must be established, and people who are deviant must be taken to task. If you show any leniency on that, credibility of the board will be lost. So these would be my 3 tips for enhancing great governance.
Superb, superb. I think 2 follow-on questions from here. One is from Pradeep Rangani to Mr. Haribhakti. Since it's the first year of mandatory disclosure for Indian companies, how is the board going to evaluate the risk of greenwashing? And then we have Michelle, who's asked, what should governments think about when it comes to greenwashing risk? So probably if Alex and Shailesh Bhai want to take this up. Shailesh Bhai, over to you.
Sure. So, as a board, it is our task to make sure that the state of the internal controls is such that the data sets that are captured are reliable. And I, for one, am a great believer in continuous assurance through robotic processes. Because today, the speed at which digital data moves through systems does not permit post-facto auditing and post-facto assurance. So you need to build an ERM system. You need to build a set of controls which operate automatically in a digital world. Cross-checks, analytics, exception reports, pattern recognition, deviant patterns, all of that must be incorporated into the culture of the organization. That is your best insurance against greenwashing. And every disclosure that goes out to the external world must be scrutinized by at least 3 eyes. Very, very critical. In any process, I have seen that if 3 eyes don't see something, there's a risk of something going amiss, and you expose yourself to the risk of greenwashing. So first, you need to have the tone at the top, intolerance to any unethical, inappropriate behavior or disclosures. 2, 3 eyes must see it before it goes out. Then you have a reasonable chance that you will not be caught greenwashing.
Great. Alex, you want to add on to this?
Yeah. Well, I agree with everything that's been said. I think, as always, the tone starts at the top. So the board's accountable. The board needs to feel ownership for the disclosures, but that starts with really thinking about why are we doing sustainability? What does it mean to our organization, and how does it fit with the purpose and strategy of the organization? And I think we've had mention of an ESG sponsor at board level. That's helpful, but I think also the entire board needs training, and they need to be armed with the knowledge of what questions to ask. And I think there needs to be an executive member who's accountable, and at the end of the day, remuneration is always the mechanism that ends up being used to reward good behavior and to avoid bad behavior. So I think you will see more and more discussion of how is ESG or sustainability integrated into remuneration. And not to spoil the conversation, but there is no silver bullet. There is no one metric that is the answer. It will be a balanced scorecard, and it needs, and what will be very obvious in the first phase of doing this is the executive will suddenly become very interested in the metrics, and they will drill into where did the numbers come from and why should I believe them. And once you get through that phase, then you can have a good conversation.
Great. Alex, I have a question for you from Tina. How widely used is technology in ESG risk management? To what level have you seen automation, that is data collection, conversion to reporting?
Yeah, I think it's evolving, and I think it depends on which part of sustainability you're talking about. I think if I look at the human resource part, then I think lots of people have got enterprise HR systems. There's a big focus on the quality of the data, particularly when you're reporting on diversity and inclusion. And I think that that's quite well developed. When it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, there are a growing number of systems that are being provided. I think people are expecting the audit scrutiny, and so there are a range of vendors that are starting to work on this. Some are more established than others, and I think one of the challenges is getting accurate data, particularly if you're in rented office space and your landlord is less than interested in providing it, just to put it in a polite way. So I think that is difficult, and the biggest challenge of all is what's called Scope 3 greenhouse gas. So your value chain, your vendors, your suppliers, and you know, a link between India and other countries is, you know, the heavy outsourcing activity where other companies are interested in the attribution of, you know, what is my share of your Scope 1 and 2. So I think there will be lots of vendor due diligence activity that's going to suddenly appear.
Super. Anita, do you want to take the next question, where the question is why companies are focusing more on the E of ESG and not the other two elements?
Yeah. And also, I was going to say, Abdul and I can probably pick up on Michelle's question on governments.
Yes, sure.
Right. The reason that the E is getting the most emphasis is because of the climate crisis and the focus on that. Even within an environmental space, it's climate. Greta Thunberg is one of the people who has brought it to the fore, and that is positive and that is good. But we've seen, just looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the nature of the challenges that we face. So it's good because it brings ESG to the fore, but it's a wider picture than that. In terms of the government aspect, and I think Abdul and I are really coming from a UK government perspective, it's very much about transparency and taxpayers having the right to know the basis on which decisions are being made, and having open access to information. So, you know, I think it's an inherent part of the culture and thinking and decision-making processes within government that they need to be open and transparent and trustworthy in terms of the information that they provide. I don't know, Abdul, if you want to add anything in terms of your experience.
Can you just remind me, what was the particular question around the government, please?
What should governments think about when it comes to greenwashing risk?
I see, yeah. I think it's obviously, as you say, it's about doing the right thing for the nation, and you know, the government is accountable for making the decisions, but also explaining the rationale behind the decision making. So it's not just we will do this and we won't do that, but we, you know, the society has moved on to asking, you know, to know why and why not, and that's become more of a pertinent way forward in the current climate. So, you know, the accountability aspect is very important, which is what I think Anita was referring to, is that the government will be held accountable for its decision making and the actions it takes, as well as no action.
Yeah.
Mr. Haribhakti, one question for you from Preeti Gulati is, how will the role of technical accountants evolve?
Very rapidly. Very happy you asked this question, because, you know, accountants will have to re-educate themselves in physics, chemistry, and biology, because the biggest change is happening at the cellular and the atomic level. And if you want to understand how that change is going to seep through your accountability systems, you need to have what Preeti described as the technical accountant, who's got a sense of what is it that drives the changes that we are seeing. Quantum, for example, quantum computing. If you don't have a clue of what it means, you're just going to be lost in the next 2 or 3 years. Or if you're not familiar with what a blockchain does, it's going to be impossible for you to manage any system, because increasingly accounting will move from entity-based accounting to ecosystem-based accounting, particularly in the context of the scope 3 that Alex was talking about. I mean, the small person will have to be brought into the data set gathering mechanism by trust mechanisms and by the larger enterprises who have a stake in making sure that their own computations and their own reporting is accurate. So this is why it's such an important question. It will have to feed into the syllabus of all accounting educators across the world. It's as important as that.
Thank you, Mr. Haribhakti. Over to you, Anita. In the interest of time, if you still want to take that last question from Madana Reddy about bringing strong internal controls under one umbrella, and how can we enhance the scope of ESG governance? What challenges do we foresee for internal controls? This is more of an audit, internal audit and risk.
Yes, I'm not an auditor. My governance perspective looks at it very much from the governing body's point of view. And as part of standards development, we've had an extensive conversation around controls. Absolutely, the importance of internal controls remains. It's even strengthened. And to the points that we've been talking about, more integrated and more of an understanding of the risks to the environment and society. But I think the board's role is very much in having oversight and recognizing where there are limitations on control as well. As was discussed, the context is changing so rapidly. It is about sometimes responding to situations where you really don't have complete or even any control over the situation. So, but we're just beginning the conversation. So these questions have been really interesting, and it's nice to see the different perspectives that people bring to ESG. On that note, let me thank each and every speaker. Thank you very much for the collaboration with our India interest group. It's been great. I think you'll agree that we've just opened up the discussion, and there's plenty more opportunities for us to continue this conversation. I hope you've enjoyed the session. If you would please complete the survey, it would give us very important information. And on that note, I thank you for your attendance, and season's greetings to everyone around the world.
Thank you. Namaste. All the best to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.